Thanks for joining. Let's go ahead and and get started. I know you're all busy. An hour is a lot of time in a busy day, so I appreciate you all joining us. And I think to me this is an interesting topic. I think we should take it more seriously. My background is more data oriented, rigorous, evidence based, science based. And the closer I got to this process, the less I saw any of that. So I've been thinking about this for quite a long time, as well as running into leaders that I don't think they need this. I think they think that they can pick people who are going to be successful. Hard to convince them that they can't. And so it presents other challenges in addition to the lack of data and rigor in science and so on. Just some logistics now that we've gotten the chat, I think, taken care of. Feel free to throw stuff in the chat with each other, chat with us. If you have specific questions, if you could put those in the question box, there should be two different options for you. One is chat and one is Q&A. If you could put questions in the Q&A box, that would be helpful. So we can get to them, but we'll certainly talk about questions afterward as well. All right, let's go to the next slide. So this is what we plan to do. We'll introduce ourselves a little bit, talk about the business case. Not a lot of time on the business case for worrying about succession. Hopefully it makes sense to everybody that we worry about it. Talk a little bit about what we do today and then what we should do tomorrow if we got serious about it. We'll talk a little bit about the next frontier. I've had these ideas running around my head for a long time about how we could apply other technology that's typically not applied to succession planning, how we can maybe get a little bit more technologically sophisticated in the way we think about it. All these things will make people nervous, including me, but other things, there's certainly other things that we can do to make this better, and we'll talk about some of that. And then technology is a big part of this. Joel and I have been spent quite a time on technology, and it was a big gap for me in my last gig, and so Joel helped me solve that problem. Let me do a quick introduction. For me, I'm Alan Colquitt. I spent most of my life in big companies, in P&G, Eli Lilly and Company, John Deere, and I come from an IO background. So science and kind of evidence-based practice and analytics is important to me, along with more of a macro view on how these things fit into company strategy, company capabilities, and so on. These are the areas that I play in, or I have played in, and I played pretty significantly in the performance management space as well lately. But lately, I still focused on that, but also a lot more focus on succession planning, talent planning, high potential identification, and some assessments that we created that will help in that area. Let me turn it over to Joel for your introduction.
Thanks, Alan. Hey, everybody. My name is Joel. I'm also an IO psychologist, but I actually started my career as a computer systems engineer, which seems like a 180, but what it did was it helped me wherever I went into, in my career, take a lot of notes about what to do, what not to do with talent management and especially assessment technology. And we came up with the idea that maybe we should build some of this technology with a number of clicks philosophy. And what you see here is the overview of the platform itself. And today we'll touch on most of these things. So we sort of integrate things. But mainly we're about simplifying the assessment process. And it starts with job modeling, which means profiles, probably have some selection, competence-based interviews, assessments, maybe you built or you have off-the-shelf assessments, L&D 360s, individual assessment performance management, succession plan, which we'll talk a bit more about today. But again, we're going to touch on most of these other pieces, in that platform. And then I added that we are kind of a custom SaaS, so we take kind of a base model and then make it more of yours, just to make things a lot easier. Ellen?
Yeah, we won't talk a lot about this, but I do think it's an interesting question. I think it does matter. Um, I don't think the base rate of incompetence is this high. I think the really for me, and this is if you haven't read Tomas Chamorro Premuzic's book on why so many incompetent men become leaders, you should read it. It's really really good. I think it's more that the base rate of competence in leadership is low. I don't know if incompetence is that high, but um, clearly leaders could be more competent, and I think that's even more true now, which was the Gartner. I think the Gartner picture on the right. I really believe that the world is changing so much that leaders are really over their head, and they're not as capable as they should be. Part of that's our fault, and I think in this process has a lot to do with that. Um, and we could have fun talking about um, typical terrible leaders and prototypical great leaders. But I think great leaders have made a difference in big companies, and terrible leaders have made a difference as well. But Ken Lay comes to mind for me for Enron, and Steve Jobs, obviously for Apple. So I do think it matters, and I think we should spend more time on it for sure. So just kind of a place to start. And this process is not that complicated. I mean, at some level, it's kind of simple, but that doesn't mean it's easy necessarily. It's what we're simply asking is what role should we plan for? Who's a good bit to develop into those roles? How do we get them ready for those roles? And then answering the question, are they ready? And are that ready doesn't mean that role just opened up. It's just amazing how often people get ready immediately when a role opens up and we have no one else to put in them. I think this is a place to start. This is where we'll ground ourselves, and we want to talk a little bit about next is kind of where what are we doing today, and whether you're proud of it or not, and feel free to throw some stuff into the chat that reflects, all right, what do we do today? What are some of the practices that you're engaged in now, kind of whether you're proud of them or not, and maybe you're doing some stuff that you're proud of, and maybe you're doing some stuff that you're really not proud of. First of all, kind of on the critical role side, um, I think what most companies do, and this is my experience as well, is we do this at the top. It doesn't get more complicated. We decide that we're going to do the top levels. That's all we do. So level is the major criterion that we focus on. We don't really think about other criteria like is this critical to to the strategy? Is the role that this plays important in giving us competitive advantage in the organization? We don't do much assessment of um, of roles against a set of criteria. This happens kind of intuitively or in a blanket way. It's the top levels, and we're done with it. In terms of successors, I don't know what your experience is. It's the usual suspects. And when people continue to look at these, the slates, they continue to see the same people over and over again. And that's because of the process that's used to identify those folks. It's the leaders that pick. They don't have a profile. They know what's required. They think they know the job. Um, there's not much assessment. There's not much rigor. They're fairly parochial. I like to pick people in my organization because I know them. And I think people need experience in my organization in order to be a leader in my organization. Whether that's true or not, you end up getting people that grow up in the same function, the same region, the same business unit, because people think that they know those people. The senior leaders know those people, and they think that kind of experience is important to be successful. And in most cases, it's really not. And I think this is kind of a data-free zone. And so it's all gut, it's all intuition, it's all my own experience, tribal knowledge, and backroom kind of stuff. And so not a lot of data to bear on these kind of questions. On the development side, I think a lot of what we're dealing with on the development side is when you compare. I don't think there's a lot of rigorous comparison of people to a profile. A lot of people don't have profiles, or if they have profiles, they're stock profiles that come with your HRIS, or you've created something, or it's generic. It's all leaders have this profile. Um, in terms of like development planning and what we talk about here when it comes to development plan is really not a development plan in the way we normally think about it. It's more of a career plan or an organization plan that the employee does not have. This is not an employee facing document. This is a document that's how are we going to get people ready for future roles? Um, and in most cases, that document is literally a PowerPoint document that was created for a talent review. That's the system of record. It's a PowerPoint document in some file somewhere on some network drive. Um, and in most cases, that plan takes the form of a job. Um, and this is the leader projecting, this person needs to do what I did. They have to go through the jobs I went through. They have to go through the programs I went through. Um, and in a lot of cases, people can't even remember what people have been through. I've been in rooms where we said, well, she needs to get an international assignment, and no one seems to remember that 8 years ago she was in an international assignment. So there isn't much of a system around this. In terms of progress, it's mostly hope and prayers. Um, so I think there's not much rigor in reviewing, and if there is rigor in reviewing, if we're going to review somebody at a future talent review, um, it's a fire drill to find out. All right, what have they been through? Let's talk to the HR person. Let's talk to the leadership development people. Have they done something? Does it seem to be working? It's all a fire drill. There really is a system or a process around it. In terms of leveraging the information, and there's really, and again, I could be wrong. In most cases, there's not a lot of metrics. The metrics that we do gather tend to be metrics that we can gather, not necessarily metrics that we should gather. Um, And when this information gets leveraged in talent reviews, and it always does, talent reviews are pretty frequently run in organizations. It's all manual. There really isn't a system. There may be some exceptions to this. Some of the human capital applications are better live than others, but I don't know many people that use their system live. It's manual. It's create a PowerPoint template and revise it over and over and over again before the meeting, and look at your Excel spreadsheets and use that in the meeting. And that becomes your record, which is very, very inefficient. I don't know if you would all, I wish we were live. We would talk, does this make sense? Does this fit? I'd like to hear you in the chat see, yeah, this is 80% of what we do. And just so to know whether we're in kind of inbounds or not inbounds. And then on the technology side, geez, how can I forget about technology? Um, Technology is really, um, our tech stack is Microsoft Office, um, and that information stored everywhere. Again, in some in the HRIS, some in PowerPoint files, some in Excel files, some in SharePoint sites, and it's fairly fragmented, difficult to get into one place, and a lot of times it's not complete. Some people will have development plans, some people won't. So technology is a big problem in our area, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to make things better with technology. Um, Thanks, Val, for sharing. Yeah, sounds like sounds like we're not far off anyway. But certainly a lot of room, is what we used to say is it's a target rich environment in this area. So there's a lot of ways to improve. All right. This is one this is something that I've thought about for years. So I think there's a reason why this doesn't improve or it doesn't improve much. And I think there's this delusion that something is better than nothing. And I think this delusion is very popular among leaders, among HR leaders as well. And the idea that is we don't need to do a lot. I mean, let's just do something. And we think something is a lot better than nothing. And the reality is, it's not. And what we're talking about here is I know what to do. I know what the job is. I know who I want, and I know how to get them ready. I know, and that's going to get me 80% of the way there. I think the reality is it's not. I think so. What we see is the imagined something is really strong, 80% of what we need. And I think what we find is, that the actual something is a heck of a lot less value than the imagined something. So I think there's this delusion that what we're doing, the limited things we're doing in organization, is getting us a lot more than it actually is. And if you look at, so this is the level of delusion in organizations. I don't think this is unique just to succession. It happens in performance management. And it happens in a lot of things that we're trying to get organizations and HR leaders and business leaders to improve. And I think that, if we were doing everything or doing things the way, if we were serious about it, we would get a lot more value. And that value is a lot better than something. But the sense is that from HR leaders, business leaders, is that doing everything and doing, getting serious about this is only going to give us some incremental value, but it really gives us a lot more value than they're actually getting. So I don't know if this resonates to you or not, but I think this is part of the problem that we face is people think they're getting more value out of the limited things that we're doing. If we were serious about it. So having said that now, so in terms of identifying critical roles, if we were serious about this, what would we do? And I think first of all, we would have criteria that go beyond just level. And we would have, so, in term, and you probably all seen a lot of these kind of criteria, these lists of criteria. How critical is it? How available are replacements for these roles? The complexity and influence and impact of the role and so on. I think we'd also have a philosophy around how deep we want to go at this, how deeply we want to do succession planning, why we want to go deep, and also have some policy conversations around when do we want to plan for a role and when do we post for a role? Do we plan where we post or not? Have those kind of conversations and be clear about our policy is there. I think we'd also have a lot more formal assessment and more rigorous assessment with more stakeholders involved in whether a role is critical just because of somebody says it's critical. Do we start a plan for it? So yeah, get multiple stakeholders involved and be clear about whose decision is this, whether we plan for a role or not. And I tend to be more in favor of doing planning deeper in the organization and having multiple categories of critical. There are functions that have critical roles that may not be enterprise corporate critical roles. There are regions and business units that have critical roles, and it's possible that we should have. You could argue that we should have more versions and more flavors of critical than just corporate, enterprise critical, and that we should capture this information in the HRIS so we can, use it analytically. And then obviously we'll talk about success profiles again, but we should have, like many of you are doing, have fit for purpose success profiles that have standardized competencies and experiences on it that should be forward looking, 5 years in the future. What's this role going to look like? What kind of challenges are people going to be facing in this role And if you were in IT 5 years ago doing succession planning for a CIO, imagine how different your that role would have been if you weren't thinking about the future. Let's talk about if we were serious about identifying successors and naming successors. I mean, we would certainly use higher quality data than we're using now. We would involve more people, get more sophisticated data with standardized profiles, standardized kind of rigorous assessments of people against those profiles, measure these competencies and experiences more rigorously, maybe with more psychometric assessments, motivation and interests. It's amazing how many people have no idea whether successors are interested in these positions. Tiffany, I know you shared a question ahead of this, but yeah, clearly we should be talking to successors about their interests, as I have seen when we have a vacancy, we have a succession plan, and we have a couple of ready now candidates. Neither one of them are interested in the position. We've been investing, for them in years to get them ready for a position they really don't want. So we should be clear on what their interest is, and measure, other attributes as well, like personality and ability and derailers and so on. All those things. We should have a lot better data than we have, and we should be pulling these successors from a kind of a qualified pool of high potentials already that are already assessed based on more sophisticated and rigorous assessments. I think we also got to be clear who decides. If you've lived in this space before, you know what it's like. An L3 adds somebody to a plan, the L2 takes them off. The HR person doesn't even know, and we look like idiots. And I have this kind of idiot index for processes, and the idiot index is how often you look like an idiot in the organization. And the more often you look like an idiot, and that happens a lot in this process when you're in the COE, the more you look like an idiot, the more this process needs to be fixed. And this process is right up there when it comes to the idiot index, because you're the last person to know frequently as the COE what's actually happening. And as a result, you look like idiots a lot. We should be more transparent. We should be telling, successors that they're successors. I think we don't need to tell them chapter and verse, but we should tell them that they have a role in our future. We should be telling their manager that they're a successor. How can they develop this person if they don't even know they're on a plan? We should be telling everyone in their organization, at senior leaders above that organization, that this is somebody we're going to develop into, for future roles. And then finally, we're if you're not an analytical person, then find someone who is, and let's make hay with this data. This is really important data, good data. Let's create good metrics with it. Health metrics, quality of the pipeline, quantity, exposure, diversity, risk, all those things. And then look at who actually succeeds, who gets onto plans, how long have they been on plans. There's a lot of metrics work to be done with this that not much has been done in the past. It's kind of an analytical desert if for those of us who are really analytically oriented. So a lot of opportunity here. In terms of developing successors, if we were serious about this, we would really look hard at comparing the profile to these successors and looking at their readiness, measuring all the things we talked about measuring on the prior slide in a more rigorous way, looking at all the stakeholders, because HR people disagree with senior leaders. They don't always say it, but there's frequently, I would like to involve more HR people in this work, because they see things differently than the business leader. The business leader always sees the best possible self when it comes to the successor. The HR person has other data that could be useful. So I really like to get HR people involved in A, who should be on a plan, and B, what are their gaps and how big are the gaps. And then we should create a plan that really, and many of you do this probably in PowerPoint in talent reviews, is create a plan that is a kind of a 3 to 5 year plan that doesn't, this isn't a plan that that employees have visibility to, but it's a plan for how we as the organization then close these gaps, get this person ready for an interim role or a terminal role for them. And this is something that we would use in talent reviews. This is not something I've seen exist in any HRIS that I've seen. I mean, I've looked heavily at success factors. I've looked at Workday. I've looked at all the other tools that are out there now, Fuel 50 and Eightfold. I just don't see a profile like this or a place to store it. And it's something that we should be using and we should be using in talent reviews because it's awful to have a PowerPoint slide on somebody's computer or in a network file be the system of record. Your privacy people don't like it. I've gotten enough privacy speeding tickets for this stuff, so they're not gonna like it. And then finally, a lot of those of you who live in this space and do talent reviews know how inefficient those are. And it'd be great if we could use this technology that houses this plan actually in the room and not have to create PowerPoint slides or use technology that enables you to create PowerPoint slides on the fly. And then finally, we would do a lot more rigorous tracking of development, actually assessing it, involving more than just the manager and an HR person or senior leaders. Are these people actually making progress and use those for important metrics that we want to track? Is somebody actually making progress? And that's a metric that we should be tracking. That it's just hard to track. Joel, just I don't know if yeah, any questions that we need to ask, answer, or entertain that you've seen?
I think so. Mary had a good question. What assessments are other people using?
Yeah, I mean, throw whatever you want in the chat if you would. That'd be awesome. I know. I mean, I've had experience using, um, and assessments are a little bit different for talent planning and high potential identification versus succession, but I've used the Hogan suite a lot. That tends to be including the HPI, the HDS, um, and the motives and values, the MVPI. Um, Others use, I know the Ravens, other tools like the OPQ and others are also, I think a well-rounded set, including interest and motivation. We ended up creating a interest and motivation assessment form ourselves because we didn't like what was available on the market. And I mean, that one should be a part of your battery for sure because we found it to be the most important predictor of whether somebody ends up succeeding is whether they actually have an interest in the role. So there are a lot of great tools out there. We can talk more about those offline and in the chat. But I think our point is we should be using these tools and not just relying on the judgments of leaders who think they can pick them. Now, look, and again, if we were serious about this, we would leverage this information more widely than we are. We would use these organization plans to update individual development plans. So we should be managing or aligning their individual development plan, which obviously is employee facing, with the organization plan that we have in mind. We should be having sit down conversations with them. The HR person should, their manager should be, their senior leader should be working with these successors as well on ensuring that their plans are updated and that the right things are on there. And again, as we said earlier, we should be integrating this information into talent reviews. That org plan is going to be critical. That's going to be the roadmap for us to get people ready, and we should be using that technology actually in the room and updating it in the room while it's live, so we can that becomes the system of record. And again, this is easy for me to say. I'm kind of a data guy, but we got to be doing a better job of measuring our pipeline health. That's partly why I really like going deeper for succession. That it's hard to know if you don't know you have a problem in your pipeline until it becomes too late. The time to deal with these problems are 2, 3, 4 years in advance. So if we go deeper and we have better metrics about what's happening deeper, we'll know whether we're in trouble or not. We need to do a lot better job integrating with TA and staffing. We should staff from the plan. If we have an external source as a successor, we should be integrating with TA so they can start a search or so they can start to beat the bushes to find out what kind of candidates are out there. And then we should be able to do a lot more analytical work. I mean, that in research work, that there's a lot we can learn about what makes for success in these roles and what needs to be developed in the rest of our leaders, with this data. Let me turn it
And
over to Joel to talk about technology, and so let's talk a little bit more about specifically.
hey guys, it's Joel. And Marianne, you asked about progression. How do you measure? I'll talk a little bit about that. And then Megan, I guess we would say you have to find some very simple technology because in general, oh, I mentioned I'm an IO site, started as a computer system engineer. My third core competency is that I'm extremely impatient. Maybe it's a derailer sometimes, but when you talk about technology, that means that everything we do, we make very simple because you don't make me click too many times to do all this stuff. And for succession planning, these are the four things essentially your platform should be able to do very easily. The number one is and we find this is blocking tackling kind of stuff, but we find that our clients just have trouble getting all the data in one place. So never mind about crazy analytics dashboards, or our clients are typically facing, hey, look, the stuff that I want to see around my critical roles and even successors lives in five different places. And then they're doing some sort of crazy Frankenstein connecting stuff together and then maybe dumping that into some sort of analytics app. And that's how you do that. The reality is that integrating data is not that difficult to do. Now, what typically happens is you're going to ask your vendors to give you some information, or maybe even have them integrate some stuff. They're going to tell you no. They're going to make it sound like it's really difficult, but it isn't. There are different ways to get information, and for succession planning, passing files, it's a pretty simple thing to do, and they're already doing that anyway for other vendors or even internal clients. So integrating that data, putting that information into one place. So essentially you have a critical roles dashboard that has all your critical roles and the information you need to see at a glance. Same thing for successors. That information exists in a lot of different places. It's not that difficult to put it into one place where you essentially have a successor dashboard with all of the successors and where they're nominated to. Yes, you should have some sort of analytics dashboard, but what we found typically is that those analytics are based on what would be usually some sort of potential score, risk, demographic data. So they're pretty I don't know, simple, somewhat useful information, but it's at that level, risk potential, high potential, at that level. So it's kind of useful, but not necessarily useful as much as if you would actually take things seriously. And that means on the critical profiles, like Alan was mentioning, yes, you can use the top, two or three levels of the organization, but you should have your leaders collectively decide, what is required of that particular position. It's like a job profile. We actually have a number of different experts give you information around competencies, skills, experiences for that particular role. So you are taking it seriously. Yes, this is a critical role, but this is why. It was good to see that 40+% of you have profiles. I think in some of the comments we were saying, well, Tiffany maybe said, yeah, we have them because I created them. And that's what we found as well. And some of your vendors probably already have some of these kind of profiles, but the reality is, our clients really wanted to look at it and kind of make them their own. And sometimes it means that you maybe using Korn Ferry competencies with DDI experiences, for example, Doug, or you have your own competencies that you're using, or own skills. Your platform should be able to use all of those different competency, skills, and experiences to create those profiles, and more specifically, to have your leaders look at all that information and give their opinion on what is critical so you can come up with that critical profile. So once you have the profile, you should really assess your successors. So right now, what we typically find is that it's a 5-point, potential score for risk of leaving score, They're very, I don't know, simple assessments, and that's what you're going to use in your analytics dashboard. But really, if you're taking it seriously, you should take that critical role profile and then do a real gap analysis between that profile and that specific assessor on those very specific competency, skills, and experiences that the team said are required. Now, you could have just a tailored assessment. That's what we do. We essentially take the profile and then send out a 360 based on that profile. But a lot of you probably already have other assessments that you're using, but they're probably in 5 different platforms. There's not a consistency. Maybe you have your own 360. All that information you should use in one place to decide whether that successor has the competency, skills, and experiences for that one role. And then you should do the same thing for the second role, the third role, and the fourth role. So you should assess people on the stuff that really matters. And it's not that difficult to do because we know that you guys are using assessments, but again, they're all over the place. Our preference is to put everything in one place, and you can actually use that information to determine what the gap is. And the fourth piece, what Alan was talking about is, all right, if you take it seriously, I have a critical role profile. I've actually assessed my successors. I use that information to actually drive the development plan. So right now, as Alan was talking about, yeah, they do have some sort of individual development plan, but it's sort of left, they do whatever they want to do on their side. Maybe it matters, maybe it doesn't matter. We prefer to do is to take that information between the role and the successor, that particular gap, and then that's how you determine whether and what somebody should do to develop. So it's a bit more focused versus sort of all over the place. Now, having said that, there are two things I think that the technology should allow you to do. One is more of the organization-facing development plan. What do we want our successor to develop in these particular areas? So it's sort of more of the organization plan. And then there is an individual plan, and you should merge those, which is what Al is talking about, motivation. But in general, there's an org plan, and we find that's kind of unusual sometimes. Not a lot of technology has that part of it. A lot of technology does have the IDP, side of it, but you should merge that stuff to get a better picture of what is really happening. And Marianne, the way we would measure progress would be essentially a 360 almost, where you have these different development activities. And then at some point, depending on what the timeline is, we'd want to send out a 360 essentially and say, hey, look, Joel was supposed to develop on this particular experience. Did he actually do that? So again, very deliberate about what we're assessing and who's giving us that information.
And it's pretty simple. 360 sounds ominous and terrible and time consuming, but the way we have this set up is it literally the org plan populates the progress assessment. It could literally be 2 or 3 questions that say, "Hey, you said you were this person. We need to develop in this area, and this is what they were going to do. Is it working?" So it's essentially, could literally be 2 or 3 or 4 questions. And I think it's important to have more than, one person answer that question because again, people have different perspectives on whether this person's developing because they see them in different circumstances. Let's talk about I won't spend much time on this, the next frontier, but there are technologies. I mean, certainly, AI, there are lots of ways to help identify and develop successors. Clearly, there's a lot of prediction analytical work we could do. There's a lot of work with AI that we could do, both in terms of identifying in the population people in the population of our organization that could be successful in these roles, but also more standard traditional, prediction, regression kinds of stuff. I think if you were also serious about this, we would do a lot more forecasting and scenario planning. What happens if we lose this person? What happens if this product does well or doesn't do well? What happens if we lose somebody? What happens if we promote somebody? Or what happens if we lose these 2 people? There are good analytical ways of doing this that we just don't do. And all of a sudden, we face a circumstance where we have to make a decision that we don't want to make because we weren't thinking ahead. And thinking ahead here is hard. So let's use technology to help us think ahead. I think another frontier is the more democratization, which we seem to be running the other way from more broadly. But who's to say that when you get to above a certain level, you have no choice about whether you take a role in the future. It's always in somebody else's hands. And what if we flip that around and said, why don't we let people opt in to these roles? And there are some companies I've talked to that are doing that. And I think there are places maybe where it makes sense to do it to start with. And then, I don't know why the other option, the other way to think about this is we do succession planning mostly for leadership positions. Maybe we should be thinking about succession for technical positions as well. A lot of companies have, technical companies have technical leader roles and technical like fellow kinds of roles that are high level strategic roles that we should probably do succession planning for as well. And there are a lot more, things, far out there that we could talk about as well that we'll say for another time. But if there are other questions that we haven't gotten to, or other topics you want to talk about in the last few minutes, and I don't think I said this at the beginning, but we obviously we record this. We'll get the slides to you one way or another. We know obviously who you are, and we'll either email them or we'll send you a link to where you can find the slides. And then I think we can also send you a link to the live discussion so you can replay it or replay it for others that weren't able to be there. I mean, I like the opt-in idea because I just can't tell you how many times that I've had conversations with people above a certain level that say, once you're above a certain level, you have to depend on somebody else for your career movement and career success. And that doesn't feel right to people. So you end up in a kind of you have to be good at running for office when you get above a certain level, and no one likes to run for office and do self promotion, or at least a lot of people don't anyway.
What we typically get is we get clients asking for what's best practice, what's the newest in succession planning, and what we say best practice would be is to focus on the thing in front of you. If you're a great coach, you don't on week one say, "Hey, look, this is what we need to do to start planning for the championship, which is 4 months away." What we need to do is focus on this week's game. Now, that's a bit of tough love, but that's best practice. You need to focus on the game this week and don't worry about the cool, fancy, whatever, down the road. You should really do what you need to do right now. And in some cases, it's really just getting the information in one place. It's at that level because everything else is driven by that. And if that's terrible, so is everything else. So don't worry about the really flashy whatever that you're getting inundated with. I focus on let's just take care of the game that's in front of us this week.
Yeah, no, agree. Attractive, but blocking and tackling is pretty important as well. Vanessa, you asked a question about job analysis. And again, I don't think these success profiles have to be the way we've looked at success profiles is there. This is not a job description. This is, we restricted it to 5 to 7 or 8 competencies, 5 to 6 experiences. And those competencies can be very standardized, whether you have a Korn Ferry competency model, DDI competency models. We started with DDI competency models. Those competency models are fine as long as you use them in a standardized way. Then it's a matter of just picking from existing competencies and saying which of these are most important. And as long as you have, this is why I like a lot of voices in the room here. Let's involve lots, as many people as makes sense in deciding what the 5 to 7 important competencies are, what the 3 to 5 or 6 experiences are, and then that's it. You don't need a full job description, a full 30-page success profile. Our focus is on the stuff that really, really matters. And you can start with existing stock profiles that a DDI has, a Korn Ferry has, and adjust from there. So you don't need to start from scratch every time. All right. Well, I think we're at time. That went quickly. I appreciate the investment of an hour in your busy day. Let us know if you have questions that we didn't get to. We can certainly get them. You have our emails here, and if you're interested in looking at any of the technology that we've created with Joel, then we're happy to show it to you.